My daughter's mother, Rachel, and her husband didn't look my way once during my granddaughter's entire birthday party. Not a single glance in the 2 hours I stood near that dessert table, watching Rachel move through the backyard greeting every guest except me, watching my son-in-law Preston walk past me twice without so much as a nod, close enough that I could hear him laughing with relatives standing just a few feet away. I want you to understand something before I tell you what happened after that party. I hadn't come empty-handed, and I don't just mean the gift I'd brought for my granddaughter Maddie. For the past 3 years, I'd been quietly sending Rachel and Preston $1,400 every single month, help with their mortgage after Preston's construction business hit a rough patch, help that had never once come with strings attached, at least not that I'd ever voiced out loud. I left that party without saying goodbye to anyone. I drove home in silence, sat at my kitchen table for a long time, and then opened my laptop and cancelled the automatic transfer I'd set up 3 years earlier. I didn't call Rachel to explain. I didn't send an angry text listing every slight I'd absorbed that afternoon. I simply stopped, quietly, the same way I'd been quietly giving for years without anyone bothering to notice. What Rachel and Preston didn't understand yet, going about their lives with the same casual confidence that had let them ignore me so completely at their own daughter's birthday, was that this wasn't the only quiet decision I'd made that week. My name is Wanda Kessler, and I was 63 years old, standing in that backyard that afternoon, understanding with a clarity that had taken me years to finally reach that being generous and being valued were apparently two entirely separate things in my daughter's eyes. Rachel was my eldest, 34 now, married to Preston for 9 years, mother to my only grandchild Maddie, who just turned 6 that day. I'd always been close to Rachel growing up, closer than I'd ever been with my younger daughter Denise, who lived 3 states away and called more out of obligation than genuine warmth. Rachel had been the daughter I'd poured myself into, the one I'd assumed, foolishly perhaps, understood exactly how much I still mattered in her adult life. The financial support had started 3 years earlier, when Preston's small construction company lost 2 major contracts within the same month, leaving them scrambling to cover their mortgage. I'd offered without being asked, transferring $1,400 that first month as what I genuinely believed was temporary help, expecting them to need it for maybe 6 months while Preston rebuilt his client base. 6 months became a year. A year became 3. The automatic transfer I'd set up simply continued, month after month, without either of us ever explicitly discussing when or whether it might eventually stop. I hadn't minded, not really. Not until that birthday party made something uncomfortably clear that I'd apparently been avoiding acknowledging for longer than I wanted to admit. Rachel and Preston had stopped seeing my financial support as help. They'd started treating it as simply expected, unremarkable, background noise in their lives that required no more acknowledgement than a utility bill being paid automatically each month. That afternoon, watching them move through their daughter's birthday party without once including me in their orbit, I understood exactly how invisible I'd become, precisely because I'd made myself so consistently, quietly useful. The following week unfolded in a silence I found almost peaceful, a strange contrast to the anxious anticipation I might have expected feeling. I didn't hear from Rachel at all, not a single text or call, which told me something significant on its own. In 3 years of monthly transfers, Rachel had never once thanked me directly for the money, but she'd also never gone a full week without contacting me about something, usually small, often related to Maddie. The silence broke on day 9. When Rachel called, her voice carrying a tightness I recognized immediately as barely restrained panic rather than genuine concern for my well-being. "Mom, is everything okay? The transfer didn't come through this month." I felt something settle in my chest at that question, the confirmation of exactly what I'd suspected but hadn't wanted to fully articulate even to myself. She hadn't called to ask why I'd left the party without saying goodbye. She hadn't called to check whether I was upset about being ignored for 2 straight hours at her daughter's birthday. She'd called about the money. "I stopped it," I said simply. "I decided I needed that money for other things right now." There was a long pause on the line. "Mom, we're counting on that support. Preston's business is finally stabilizing, but we restructured some of our other expenses assuming that transfer would continue." "Is this because of the party?" "Because we were just really busy hosting, Mom. It wasn't personal." I listened to her explanation, understanding that even now, faced directly with the possibility that I'd been hurt, Rachel's primary concern remained the financial disruption rather than any genuine curiosity about how 2 hours of being completely ignored might have actually made me feel. "I need some time to think about things," I told her, and ended the call before she could push further, understanding that whatever came next required more careful consideration than a single phone conversation could accommodate. 2 weeks after that conversation, Rachel showed up at my house unannounced, Maddie in tow, holding a small bouquet of grocery store flowers that felt more like a tactical decision than genuine sentiment. "I brought Maddie to see you," she said, though Maddie herself seemed confused about why we were suddenly visiting Grandma on a random Tuesday afternoon, glancing between us with the particular uncertainty children have when they sense tension they don't fully understand. I let them in, made tea, and watched Maddie settle happily into my living room with a coloring book I kept specifically for her visits, while Rachel and I sat across from each other with the careful, formal politeness of people navigating unfamiliar territory. "I've been thinking about what you said," Rachel began, "about needing that money for other things. Preston and I talked, and we can probably manage without it if we adjust our budget. We just wanted to make sure everything's okay with you, that this isn't about something we did." I noticed again, the careful way Rachel avoided directly acknowledging the party itself, framing her concern as general rather than specifically addressing the 2 hours I'd spent standing alone at her daughter's birthday. "Rachel," I said finally, "did you notice that I left your party without saying goodbye to anyone?" She looked genuinely startled by the direct question. I assumed you had somewhere else to be. You didn't seem upset when I saw you. I stood near your dessert table for nearly 2 hours, I said, keeping my voice steady despite the ache building in my chest. Neither you nor Preston spoke to me once. Not a greeting, not an introduction to any of the guests I didn't know, nothing. I left because I finally understood something I think I'd been avoiding understanding for a while now. Rachel's expression shifted, something between genuine confusion and dawning discomfort. Mom, I had no idea. I was just so busy hosting. I didn't even realize. That's exactly the problem, I said quietly. You didn't realize because somewhere along the way, my presence stopped registering as something that required your attention, while my financial support apparently never stopped registering as something you expected. Rachel sat with that for a long moment, her earlier defensive posture slowly softening into something more genuinely reflective. I think I've been taking you for granted, she admitted quietly. Not just the money. All of it. I got so used to you just being there, being reliable, that I stopped actually seeing you as someone whose feelings I needed to consider. That's honest, I said. I appreciate that. Is that why you stopped the transfer? To get our attention. I considered the question carefully before answering. Partly, maybe, though I didn't consciously frame it that way at the time. Mostly, I think I just needed to understand what our relationship actually looked like without the money attached to it. Whether you'd still want me around, still notice me, still make room for me, if I wasn't quietly funding part of your life every month. Rachel's eyes filled with tears, genuine ones this time, not the practiced concern from earlier in our conversation. I do want you around, Mom. I know I haven't shown that very well lately, especially not at the party. I got caught up in hosting, in making sure Preston's business contacts felt properly entertained, and I completely lost track of making sure my own mother felt welcome at her granddaughter's birthday. We talked for nearly 2 hours that afternoon, working through years of assumptions and unspoken resentments that had apparently been building quietly on both sides, Rachel's growing sense of entitlement to my support intersecting with my own reluctance to voice my needs clearly, both of us contributing, in different ways, to the disconnect that had finally become undeniable at that birthday party. I'm not going to restart the automatic transfer, I told her, as she prepared to leave with Maddie that evening. Not because I'm angry, but because I think we both need to understand what our relationship looks like when it's not built around that arrangement. Rachel nodded slowly, understanding, I think, that this wasn't punishment, but rather an attempt to build something more genuine between us. The months that followed unfolded slowly, both Rachel and Preston adjusting to managing their finances without my monthly support, a transition that proved genuinely difficult at first but ultimately pushed Preston to more aggressively pursue new contracts for his business. contracts he later admitted he might have delayed pursuing if my financial cushion had remained available indefinitely. More significantly, my relationship with Rachel began shifting in ways that felt more substantial than our previous dynamic had ever allowed. She started calling more frequently, not about money, but about small, ordinary things, Maddie's school updates, a book she thought I might enjoy, questions about my own life that she'd apparently stopped asking somewhere during those 3 years when our relationship had quietly narrowed down to a financial transaction dressed up as family support. I attended Maddie's next birthday party 6 months later, and the difference was immediate and unmistakable. Rachel introduced me properly to guests I didn't know, made sure I had a comfortable seat near the family rather than standing awkwardly near the food table, checked in with me periodically throughout the afternoon in a way that felt genuine rather than performed. Preston, too, made a visible effort, thanking me specifically, without prompting, for the years of support I'd provided, an acknowledgement that arrived considerably later than I might have wanted, but felt meaningful nonetheless for finally being spoken aloud. I don't regret cancelling that transfer, even though the following months required financial adjustments on their end that weren't easy. I understand now that my consistent, quiet generosity had inadvertently become something that allowed Rachel and Preston to stop actively choosing to include me, replaced instead by an assumption that my support, both financial and emotional, would simply continue regardless of how much attention they paid to maintaining our actual relationship. I think about that birthday party often, standing alone near the dessert table, finally understanding that being helpful and being valued aren't automatically the same thing, no matter how much you might want them to be. So I'll ask you what I've asked myself since that day. If the people you'd quietly supported for years began treating your presence as optional while still expecting your help, would you have continued giving anyway? Or would you have stopped, the way I did, to find out what actually remained once the money disappeared?